right, so this week, the exciting conclusion of the theory of independent music, right? So last time we talked about this, we got to the point where we could set up this equation, right? This is the number of audience members, the number of people out there who are willing to pay something for music in their lives, although it might be very little. For some people, it might be more. This is the average amount that one of those people pays for music in their life, right? So this side of the equation represents the total amount of money that's available to support independent music. On this side, we have the number of musicians, the number of independent musicians that are being supported by that amount of money. And we have, for each one, the average income and average cost associated with making the music, right? Whereas this income is just regular living expenses. This is like, well, I also need to pay for recording studios, or I need to pay for live performances, or whatever it is. So, starting with this equation, I think one of the most interesting things to look at is this. Okay, if you assume that the number of audience members in the world is pretty much everybody, right? Because musicians are often also people who are interested in music and spending money on checking out music and going to shows and things like that, right? So this number is really sort of everybody. This is the number of musicians, okay? So this fraction represents the fraction of the population, or the audience population anyway, that are musicians or can be musicians. See, this gets to the essence, in my mind, of one of the biggest questions about the theory of independent music. When I started thinking about that concept that I talked about in part one, there's all these billions of people in the world. If I can find some fraction of them who are interested in my music and willing to support me, that's my audience, and that's the thing that turns out whether or not I can sustain myself in music. But the catch is that every other independent artist is doing that too. So the question becomes, what fraction of the population can be artists based on how much money the average person spends on music, right? So this is the equation that works that out. To get this value, you can algebraically manipulate this equation on top, and what you get is this over here. Okay? The fraction of population that can be sustained making art is basically the same as the ratio of how much money people spend on art to how much money people need to live and make art, right? It kind of makes sense. So, what happens now when we play around with throwing some actual numbers in here, right? We know this is a fraction, so we don't really care about estimating the population, the number of musicians. We just want to know what fraction can be sustained. So let's just throw some crazy ballpark numbers onto this side of the equation, right? So we're going to keep working, but we're going to just do the right side of the equation. Let's paint a pretty conservative picture. Let's say that the average person in the audience population, which is maybe, say, adults in the United States or in North America or what have you. Let's say that the average person in the market is going to spend maybe $50 a year. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but you know, some people spend way more than that, right? Hundreds of dollars going to see concerts and buying records and buying music on iTunes and all this kind of stuff, right? Other people probably don't spend anything on music, right? There's probably some people who just listen to the radio or, you know, look at stuff on YouTube for nothing and, you know, no problem, right? So let's say $50, just to make the math easy. Nice round number. Let's say the average audience member spends $50 a year willing to spend it on music. Now, let's also paint a fairly conservative picture in terms of income, right? Let's say an independent artist, just to kind of make a living and sustain themselves and just kind of, you know, live a comfortable enough life that they can kind of create their art and not be like totally stressed out by some other job that they have to have or what have you, right? Just sort of self-sustaining, low-key. Let's say $50K, $50,000 a year, right? Income. Okay, right? Not a pittance, but also not living in the lap of luxury for sure, right? And let's also say, just to make the math easy, let's say that for many independent artists, relative to their living costs, this production cost of making their music is negligible. Now, that's not true for most artists, for many artists. At the very least, you're paying for, maintaining your instruments, or if you're recording to a computer, you've got to keep that up to date and software and things like that. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, that you can keep those costs pretty minimal and just kind of roll them into your living expenses. Let's put a zero here for now. Well, when you do this, I picked these numbers to make the math pretty easy. You can see how this works out. This works out to 1 in 1,000, right? If you use these estimates, you would come up with the calculation that out of every 1,000 members of the audience, one of them can be an artist sustainably. Now, this assumes, of course, that all of the money coming in is evenly distributed going out, which is, of course, not the case, right? So for every artist who makes $100K instead of $50K on their music, that means that there's an artist who's making nothing, right? If you look at sort of the more historical music industry where you have artists making millions in a year, well, now you have a whole lot of artists who aren't making anything at all, right? Or have to make by a lot less. But you can also say to yourself, well, what if we have artists who are part-time musicians and then have sort of a part-time job that helps make up some of their money on the side? Well, then we can sustain more of them, right? So that maybe this number goes down to 25K and you end up with 2 people in 1,000 that can be artists. But the point is that what numbers you want to plug into here and play around with, totally up to you. Put in whatever estimates you want. But the equation is kind of based on this idea that given the economic starting point, you can start to play around with knowing what percentage of your population can be sustained as independent artists. And for me, this is a really interesting thing to play around with. So there you go, in 3 parts, the theory of independent music. I'd love people's thoughts on this. If anybody wants to make comments, I'd love to see people play with these equations, make them more complex, take them further, play around with different estimates. So please share your thoughts. Thanks very much. Okay, had a little bit of a longer content video this week, so I'm going to keep the music link short and sweet. In my adventures in Bandcamp, exploring and finding new stuff, I've stumbled across a whole bunch of bands, and one of the ones that sort of made the honorable mention list was this band called Eeloy. It's a trio of guys out of Austin, Texas, I believe, and they're just this. I just enjoyed them. I don't know what to say about it. Something about it grabbed me. The music is fast paced. It's kind of, I almost want to call it indie, light metal, hard rock, something in that kind of range. It's got this kind of nice, homegrown, raw, kind of lo-fi sound to it, but the instrumentation is aggressive and strong, and they sound really tight. The vocals are kind of this interesting mix of sort of like hard rock screaming, and then this other kind of like almost not quite speech singing, but this very reminiscent of the Cars almost, just only in the vocals though. The music is totally different. They have just this short 3-song EP online, and the first 2 tracks almost kind of go together. They sound like they're sort of intended to be a sweet, fast-moving stuff. The 3rd track is very different and kind of like laid back and a little bit more straight rock. But anyway, just something interesting I found. Figured I'd share it with you. One note: it is definitely sort of a not safe for work, not safe for kids recording. There's some language in there. But I just enjoyed it, so thought I'd share it with you. Thanks.